So what is Azure Migrate, right? And what are the tools available for help in helping migrate, right? This is the main thing that we want to understand. So main thing is it allows you to understand what do you have on premises. It collects all the inventory. आपकी क्या virtual machines हैं, क्या उनके disk, CPU, everything. It collects all this information, right? And gives you a very, and then maps it to what is the most probable Azure VM that you need to pick, right, for this thing. So it does all that work for you. Then once you do that, it basically starts replicating and replicate the whole VM into Azure, right? So very, very amazing service. It used to be very painful to use. Now it is a very, very sophisticated service, right? Azure Migrate. तो इसमें tools क्या हैं? It basically discovers and assesses on-prem servers running on any of the virtualization platform, right? Either Hyper-V, VMware, or maybe physical servers, right? It can collect all of them. It can see all of them and collect all their information, right? It can do all of that. Then next part is, right, it can help you migrate. So assessment is one thing, then comes the migration part, right? It can help you do that as well. That it can start replicating all of those things, right? आप उसको वेरीफाई करते हो कि क्या स्पेक्स हैं उसके, या किस तरह करना है, इस VM के अंदर करना है, ये डिस्क हैं, you verify everything, and then it basically does the migration for you. It replicates everything. Of course, when you see replication, that means it's going to take over your bandwidth, right? So generally when we do Azure Migrate, when we know what happens is हम अपने telecom provider के पास, let's say PTCL है या whoever it is, right? We go and say we need 200 Mbps for next 1 month or 500 Mbps. Generally, big data center migrations, we request usually at least 500 to 1 gig, 1 Gbps, right, for at least a month or 2 months. And that is a pretty costly thing, right? Usually companies run on 100 or 200. But migration cost के अंदर जो चीज़ होती है, that is to make sure we are getting all this info, we are getting this kind of bandwidth, right? So first is server discovery assessment, then there is server migration, right? Then same thing, data migration assistant. ये मैंने आपको SQL सर्वर के अंदर बताया था, just to go back for a second. अगर मैं कहूँ इसके अंदर Azure SQL migration, right? So there is a migration wizard and there's a migration tools as well. And what they do is they allow you to assess first of all. क्यों? क्योंकि हमने बताया था कि हमने migration strategies थी, whether this will go to Azure SQL VM or MI or it'll go to Azure SQL, right? So these are the tools basically that allow you to do that. Let me just do this and right. So this is the Azure Data Studio. You give the pointer, you install it locally, and ये आपके SQL Server से भी connect हो सकता है. You can use it as a management tool, right? But it has a migration extension. और उसके अंदर then you can do all of these things. You can assess, it'll give you the report, and you can do all of those things, okay? Not only that, right? It also allows to synchronize all the changes. We अपने database तो वहाँ पे डाल दिया, it has migrated, but until the application moves over there and all the infrastructure is set up, I want to make sure my changes are going. So these tools also make sure to synchronize all the changes as well. Okay, it's very critical thing. Also you can use transactional replication. ये मैंने आपको बताया था कि when you want to create a SQL server, जब हमारा second node होती है, how does it replicate? उसकी जो transaction log है, you can use that, you run it on the other node, every transaction that is happening, and it makes it a replica of the primary node, right? This is the T log, transaction log replication, okay? So a database के ऊपर, for example, right? They talk about various different things, sizing, lot of those things, right? They talk about this one to Azure SQL, to SQL Server on Azure VMs. You can see कि हर एक के लिए उन्होंने बताए हुए rules and all those things, right? तो यही है आपका डेटा स्टूडियो में with this extension and it will do all of this stuff for you. ठीक है, क्योंकि आपने वहाँ पे आपने चेक करना है कि वहाँ पे मेरा MI है या your SQL है, and it checks the compatibility, gives the whole report, and once you are ready, it's able to, once you fix the problems, for example, then it will help you migrate as well, right? So it's a very, very nice and sophisticated tool, right, for all these things. Again, Azure VMs running SQL Server, there are तीन चीज़ें हैं, so we need to be very clear on those things, ठीक है, कि कौन सा tool है हमारे पास and what it does. फिर Web App Migration Assistant. This is really, really amazing, right? What it does is, आप उसको web application देते हो on premises के ऊपर, it looks at everything, right? And then it allows you to migrate. And we'll see what are the options it gives you, right? Azure App Service से migrate करा देता है आपकी, right? It can tell you what the issues are and what not and all those things, right? Let's take a look. For example, अगर हम कहते हैं Azure Migrate Web App Migration Assistant. ये उन्होंने वो बताएंगे, मैं इसमें से राइट सही वाला लिंक करके ना मैं आई विल गिव इट टू यू, ओके? सो दे हैव मेंशन मेनी थिंग्स. And last but not least, अगर आपके पास data is too much, sometimes customers have petabytes of data and it becomes cost prohibitive कि आप इतनी बड़ी bandwidth लो and you transfer it in a reasonable period of time. तो Microsoft कहते हैं we will send you the disks, आपको जितनी चाहिए, and then you can load the data with our utility and ship it back to us, और हम वो disk जो हैं आपकी copy कर देंगे directly, right? They do those kind of things as well. तो ये बेसिकली आप माई डिस्कवरी इन असिस्टेंट, राइट? आप एक एप्लीकेशन या इसकी यूटिलिटी है appliance which is basically a virtual machine with some tools running. You install it locally and you register it with your Azure subscription and you control it from over here. So that is like an appliance sitting in your data center that has access to everything. And then it starts discovering using various different agents and all those things, and it has agentless mode as well. But very simply speaking, you are basically you start collecting the data, and it starts the assessment. What do you have on premises? Okay. So यहाँ पे, when you look at that discovery, it can discover VMware, Hyper-V, physical servers, AWS and GCP. और ये मैंने माइग्रेशन की हुई GCP से, किसी की VM थी बहुत बड़ी GCP के ऊपर, we use Azure Migrate, GCP के ऊपर जाके उसने डिस्कवर किया and it was able to migrate from GCP to Azure, that same VM, right? So that does that as well, right? Assessment, वो क्या यूजेज है, क्या नेटवर्क यूजेज है, उसको कौन सी डिस्क है, कौन सा ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम है, on and on and on, right? It take cares of all of those things, right? And then the migration of these things, right? Migrate in VMware to servers in VMware, in Hyper-V, physical, AWS, GCP, right? maybe there's a newer list with more added services, but you get the idea. Sari assessment हो रही है and it's migrating also. And then it has a modernization part also, right? वो जो Azure Migrate है, it can say, I can containerize your ASP.NET apps running on premises and I can migrate them to AKS. It can containerize and move it, right? Java की web application आपके on premises it is running, it checks the dependencies क्या है उसको आपको container बना के and it can give it to you and tell it okay and ask you where to run it and you can give it AKS and it will run that thing in AKS, right? App service containers, right? It can do that. AKS में भी कर लो, app service में भी कर लो. Which is what is app service containers? आपकी app service है, use the container option in that one, right? I can say I don't want to use AKS, right? Same thing with Java. You can use app service containers for that one as well, right? So on and so forth. So the app containerization, what does it do, right? It looks at the application, सारे component discover करता है. It can see okay it's using .NET, which version, all of that. उसके बाद आपको docker file बना के देता है जिससे आप image बना लेते हो उसको. जब compile करते हो docker file को, you get an image. और docker file को you can modify. वो कहते हैं इसको modify करना है, you can modify as well, and then you can create the image, right? And once you have the image, you can say which container registry to push. हमने पढ़ा था कि for images they need to be in the container registry. So हमें Docker हमें देता है container registry, but usually people create their own container registries in Azure, right? हमने पढ़ चुके हैं. I'm just going rehashing at these things, right? So if I say container registries, right? I can create a container. When we create container registries, every customer, right, to do these kind of things, so they can load their containers privately in their own container registry, right? And if you don't, and based on these things, it can also generate the Kubernetes YAML files, right, to deploy these things to AKS, and you can customize those YAML files, right? So you can see it's very, very amazing service to do the migration part. Very amazing. Takes out all the headache and everything from here. Data box. So basically, as I've said, too much data, you don't have आप migrate कर रहे हो, and you cannot migrate this in a feasible time frame, right? In a good time frame. So आप कहते हो ये Microsoft कहता है I'll send you the disks and copy the data, उनकी अपनी utility है, and what we'll do is we'll copy into your storage accounts into data center. हम directly plug in करके हम आप इसको copy कर देंगे, right? So you can see कि अगर आपके पास डिस्क आ रही हैं और FedEx से आती हैं वो 3-4 दिन लगते हैं उसको, and then you can say 3-4 दिन आपको कॉपी में लगेंगे, 3-4 दिन उसको वापस जाने में लगेंगे और 2-4 दिन उनको कॉपी करने में लगेंगे, right? So at least 2 weeks. But service is cheap, right? Because they will charge you the rent of the disks, FedEx की shipping और return service आपको pay करनी पड़ेगी, and that's it. Instead of for buying extremely expensive bandwidth for at least 2-3 months and maybe more to copy this data, आप 2 हफ्ते के अंदर आप फारिग हो जाओगे इससे, ठीक है? So this is the motivation for this thing. ये आपको अगर काफ़ी डेटा भी है, आप उसको कहते हो मुझे कॉपी करके दे दो, they will do that for you also, okay? अब इससे क्या यूज केसेस हैं? रिमेंबर दीज थिंग्स एट अ हाई लेवल, राइट? Usually it's the initial bulk transfer, right? It's massive work that you do. Also, अगर आपके पास periodically you are uploading small bandwidth है, but you need to upload modified data, you can do this thing, right? आपके पास बहुत ज़्यादा historical data logs पड़ी हुई that you need to do. And they're very special cases, right? That you have huge amount of data that you don't want to spend too much money and time copying this, right? So all these kind of things. Sometimes लोगों के पास databases के बहुत ज़्यादा backups पड़े हुए होते हैं, right? Those becomes an issue also. Disaster recovery के लिए you can customer can say I need all of my data, I want to be restored on premises, right? Please send it to me in a disk or something, right? You can do it very quickly. Otherwise आपको बड़ा लंबा setup करना पड़ता है for recovery and fallback and various different things, right? गवर्नमेंट कैन से कि आपका डेटा शुड नॉट बी सिटिंग इन एज्योर, आपका डेटा कई सालों से एक्यूमुलेट हो रहा है, बहुत ज़्यादा है, इट विल टेक टाइम, यू कैन आस्क माइक्रोसॉफ्ट टू सेंड इट ऑन डेटा बॉक्स, राइट? डेटा बॉक्स की डिफरेंट वो हैं, साइजेज हैं, फ्रॉम स्मॉल टू वेरी वेरी बिग थिंग्स एज वेल, राइट? सो जस्ट टू शो यू, यहाँ पे एज्योर डेटा बॉक्स, मैं इसकी तस्वीर दिखाना चाह रहा हूँ आपको, इसके डिफरेंट सर्विस टीयर्स हैं एक्चुअली। ये देखो, ये एक डिस्क है, ये बिगर एंड देन दिस द बिगेस्ट वन, राइट? ये टायरों के ऊपर इट्स अ पेटाबाइट्स ऑफ डेटा, दे सेंड इट टू यू एंड यू कैन कॉपी ऑल ऑफ दिस स्टफ, राइट? ये छोटी भी, आई थिंक द स्मॉलेस्ट वन इज डेटा बॉक्स दिस जो है ना, लेट मी सी, ये 100 टेराबाइट है, ये वाली कैपेसिटी है इसकी। इसमें ये डेटा बॉक्स डिस्क जो है, ये 8 टेराबाइट की एसएसडीज आपको भेजते हैं एंड 5 अप टू 5, राइट? सो आप 40 टेराबाइट की एक ये सर्विस है, ये आप मंगवा सकते हो उनसे, ठीक है? इफ यू नीड अ बिगर वन देन 40 टेराबाइट्स, you go to the data box, bigger one, right? And this one is heavy, right? It can do 1 petabyte of data. ये मैं डाल दूंगा स्लाइड में इंफॉर्मेशन भी, ये क्या चीज़ है, ठीक है? So this is the big one, because 1 petabyte is not feasible to copy in a reasonable period of time, right? So this is what happens basically, right? So large, massive data center migrations, उसके अंदर you do these kind of things, right? तो ये data center में आता है और ये ship होता है FedEx से or whatever it is, right? And they upload it to the cloud, right? Upload it where it is accessible, right? इसकी एक limitation है that you need to be in a region where you are being serviced, right? They will not ship these disks to, for example, अगर आप पाकिस्तान में बैठे हो, right? And you're using service which is in West Europe or Europe में data center use कर रहे हो, they will send you anywhere in Europe, but they will not send you just because you're sitting in Pakistan, right? ये हमारा कस्टमर का इश्यू था, they were sitting in Saudi Arabia, they were using in Europe data center, उन्होंने कहा जी डिस्क आपको नहीं भेजी जा सकती, यूरोप, your European customer, you will send you anywhere in Europe, but it will not come to outside the region, outside the geographic region, right? So that became a problem, right? So generally that is why you want to use the service data center in your region for these kind of things. जी, you can. उसकी हमने मोटिवेशन बताया, ऑनलाइन मीन्स अपलोड करें थ्रू इंटरनेट, थ्रू आवर इंटरनेट बैंडविड्थ. We discussed this already, right? The motivation is कि अगर आपके पास डेटा इज टू मच, राइट? लेट्स यहाँ पे 40 टेराबाइट्स डेटा, राइट? ये let's look at the case of data box disk. I mean, on a daily basis, आपने अगर 1 टेराबाइट करना है, 1 टेराबाइट इज अ ह्यूज अमाउंट ऑफ डेटा, और आप बिजनेस आवर्स में यू कैनॉट डू इट, राइट? बिकॉज यू विल ईट अप द बैंडविड्थ. सो व्हाट हैपेंस इज, आप ऑफ टाइम में करते हो एंड इट कैन टेक ओवर अ मंथ to transfer this kind of data, 40 terabytes, right? It can take very very long period of time. उसके लिए फिर आपको you have to buy very expensive bandwidth. आप कहते हो टेलीकॉम प्रोवाइडर से मुझे 500 गिग की वो दो, so I can transfer this thing, right? So what happens is कि that cost is very huge. यहाँ पे you can copy the data, right? and within 2 weeks it is sitting in your storage account at a much cheaper cost. ठीक है? So that is the motivation. और यहाँ पे this is 40 terabyte. 100 जाओगे the cost will double triple if you want to do online from your own data center, right? क्योंकि ऑलरेडी आपने बैंडविड्थ जो खरीदी हुई है उसमें आपकी VMs भी तो रेप्लिकेट हो रही हैं. This is a one time cost, right? अब one time cost आप incur करोगे from the telecom company, which can be very huge. Already you are spending lot of money for this thing, what you call replicating your virtual machines, right? अब जब वो भी हो रही हैं, you will get very minimal bandwidth to copy the data. आपका backups पड़े हुए हैं, आपकी files पड़ी हैं, whatever it is, right, that you have this much data. तो आपकी bandwidth becomes a huge issue basically, right? So that is the reason it's a very cost effective and very quick way to copy data, right? Online option is, yes, agar aapka data is manageable, we always use online, right? File sync bhi to hai, it is copying files and synchronizing files, but it does at its own pace, jitni bandwidth mili hui hai usko. And we are not worried too much because हम कहेंगे महीने तक ये करता रहे बेशक जो कर रहा है, हमारी फाइल्स तो सिंक हो जाएंगी वहाँ पे क्लाउड में चली जाएंगी. But when you have हमारे customers हैं, for just to let you know, उनके पास 10 साल के टेप बैकअप्स पड़े हुए हैं and they want to move to cloud. Massive tape disks in remote storages and all that, right? Though that is simply not feasible to copy online, right? वो आप उसको करते हो उसके अंदर और कॉपी करते हो इनके अंदर डेटा बॉक्स के अंदर and then ship the data box, right? अब उसके अंदर आपको स्पीड भी नहीं चाहिए, आपको आप कहते हो ये मैं आराम से कर लूँगा. I don't need to spend that much huge amount of money on the bandwidth and resources to do this kind of thing. I'll get the data box, Microsoft will charge me a little bit rent money for their disk while they're being shipped out, and once it is copied, they will take care of it, right? So that is a very big motivation. Cost, time and everything, right? Right? Busy networks are not an option. जब आपकी जो नेटवर्किंग है उसके अंदर ये ऑप्शन अवेलेबल नहीं है, आपको जो नेटवर्क है बैंडविड्थ नहीं अवेलेबल, you don't want to spend that much money, right? So you do these kind of things. And devise a wipe clean after upload with the government, with the Department of Defense special standards, right? It wipes out, so ensure that no data is recoverable from there, right? Right, so this is data box, right? So anyway, look at this one because I will ask you. I wanted to have the full picture now, right? So if you go back to the case studies part, now the final thing is, for example, if I look at, for example, in the case studies, right? How you will pick? I will give you a scenario to the SQL database. Now you can say we will use Azure Migrate to migrate these things to create the Docker file and containerize these things and move it to AKS, right? Now your problem, you get an end-to-end solution now, right? हम यहाँ पे Azure Migrate use करेंगे, यहाँ से extract करेंगे इसको and move it to app service containers or AKS containers depending on the situation. Now look at this thing, that this thing doesn't make sense anymore, right? अगर आपने लेफ्ट एंड शिफ्ट ही करना है, आपने VM का इमेज ही बनाना है यहाँ से और आपने VM स्केल सेट को इमेज देना है, then much easier thing would be that I can use Azure Migrate to grab the application, containerize it, and then simply deploy it, right? You can see how amazing that is. उसके अंदर आपके जो challenges हैं वो मैंने आपको बता चुका हूँ पहले भी challenges, right? वो challenges हैं basically which are कि अगर एप्लीकेशन इज यूजिंग कोई APIs हैं स्टोरेज के लिए and all those things, right? And it has certain incompatibilities. इतनी नहीं होती, it really works fine, right? But regardless, this is a becomes a very nice thing to move all of these things to containers, whether it's app service containers or AKS. This becomes a very very simple thing. आप डेटा स्टूडियो के अंदर इसको खोलोगे और उसके अंदर चेक करोगे कंपैटिबिलिटी है MI के साथ या Azure SQL के साथ. If none of them is there, we'll move to Azure, Azure VM, SQL over Azure VM, right? So now you get the clarity on this one, how these migrations are actually done. So Azure Migrate के ऊपर Microsoft has done amazing amount of work to make these things very very simple. ठीक है, मैं इन स्लाइड्स को थोड़ा सा अपडेट कर दूंगा Azure Migrate की, so you have more information, right? So make sure we cover all of these aspects. We have end-to-end ideas about all of these things. ठीक है? Any questions बच्चों?